In this video, I'll be talking about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and our focus will be on the volume 3, and we'll talk a little bit, we'll recap chapters 3 and then move on to chapter 4, and we'll discuss this theme of revenge as well as some elements of the Gothic that are displayed in this part of the book. Okay, so just to recap, in chapter 3 of volume 3, Victor has broken his promise to the creature, and the creature has witnessed him ripping apart the body of the female being that he was in the process of creating. So he's broken his promise, and now the creature has vowed revenge against Victor. And this is on page 192, where he vows revenge. He says, "Are you to be happy while I grovel in the intensity of my wretchedness? You can blast my other passions, but revenge remains, revenge, henceforth dearer than light or food. I may die, but first you, my tyrant and tormentor, shall curse the sun that gazes on your misery. Beware, for I am fearless and therefore powerful. I will watch with the willingness of a snake that I may sting with its venom. You shall repent of the injuries you inflict." So basically, the creature is again vowing revenge, and there is this parallelism that's created between the monster's suffering and then Victor's suffering. So as long as the creature is unhappy and alone, it's going to find a way to make sure that Victor is also unhappy and alone as well. The threat that the creature gives to Victor is, he says, "It is well I go, but remember I shall be with you on your wedding night." So if you remember, Victor is engaged to Elizabeth, and it's at the end of this journey that he took with Henry that he's going to come back to Geneva and marry Elizabeth. So the monster knows that Victor is engaged to Elizabeth, and he wants to make sure that Victor knows and dreads that moment that, when he's going to get married, that something terrible is going to happen. So there is this impending doom that aligns with Victor's wedding night. And the symbolism of the wedding night is kind of interesting. So if you think about why the monster picks Victor's wedding night as his night to seek revenge, traditionally, the wedding night is the night that a man and wife, husband and wife, would consummate their marriage and, have a sexual relationship for the first time. So this is the night that the monster chooses to kill Victor. So he wants to, or upset their marriage, right? So he wants to target this moment that he's not allowed to experience himself, consummation, reproduction, all those things that are denied him, marriage, partnership, love, sex, all those things that the creature doesn't have access to because he's shunned and alone. So that's what he's going to prevent Victor in his life from having that kind of fulfillment. Victor interprets the monster's threat as a threat to himself. So he sees it as, a period. He says, that then was the period fixed for the fulfillment of my destiny. In that hour I should die and at once satisfy and extinguish his malice. So he's anticipating the wedding night as the night when the monster will confront him, and that's the make or break moment of their confrontation where one or both of them will die. That's at least what Victor is anticipating. So in a way, Mary Shelley is playing with this idea of the Gothic double. And you can just, look at the definition on the slide here from Hughes et al. But the Gothic double refers to a character or two or more characters who parallel each other in action or personality. And so Victor and his creature, they are, parent and offspring, father and son in certain regards, but they're also sort of Gothic doubles of one another. They're leading parallel but divergent paths. So we see them both paralleling each other in terms of their sense of anger and hatred towards one another. They're both seeking each other's destruction, and they're both seeking, the fulfillment of a female companion, but we'll see how that plays out in the ending of the book. But there is, this parallelism between both characters' personality traits as well. The monster, some critics have seen it as embodying some of the worst of Victor's characteristics. So his pride, his sense of dominance, that toxic masculinity that we talked about, that could also be played out in the creature's desire or demand for a female companion, or his idea that he's mastering or dominating Victor as a slave, he calls him, and I'm your master. So that sense of power over or authority or dominance, that's kind of the toxic trait that Victor had early on in the book. He's kind of lost that toxic part of him. In the later half of the book, he's been humbled, and he just wants to seek to restore order in the natural world and make right what he's done wrong in his past. But whether or not he gets that chance, you have to complete the book to see. So yeah, Mary Shelley is obviously doing a lot with the Gothic horror aspects of Gothic horror in her text. And just note here, so the definition of Gothic doubling. So in Gothic literature, doubling elicits deep anxieties about distinctions between self and other, and it raises a cautionary point that a thin line separates good and evil. So in that way, we can see, good and evil in each character. Victor has been both good and bad in his intentions. The creature as well is both good and evil. Humanity in general can be described as having, both good and evil aspects or acts or behaviors associated with it. So, there is a thin line separating those two elements, right? Each person can embody goodness or evilness depending on their situation or the actions that they take in that moment. So in chapter 4 of volume 3, we learn, or we see the product of the creature's sense of revenge. And it turns out that the creature has murdered Victor's best friend, Henry Clerval. And you'll remember Henry kind of represented Victor as a young man. He was sort of a foil character in that regard, representing certain parts of Victor's sort of innocence and his, the sense that he was at once a young man who had the whole world at his fingertips. And that's what's been taken from him. Both Victor has a sense of loss, that he's no longer the former man that he once was, and he's also now lost his best friend, Henry. And this is on page 200. So there's this, criminal case that's opened up against Victor because he's sort of being framed as the murderer of Henry. But Victor realizes that, again, this is the creature's revenge. And, he sees the lifeless form of Henry Clerval stretched before me. And he says here, he exclaimed, "Have my murderous machinations deprived you also, my dearest Henry, of life? 2 I have already destroyed. Other victims await their destiny, but you, Clerval, my friend, my benefactor." So we have the death toll of Victor's actions, accumulating in multiple deaths of innocent people. So now Clerval is added to that list, along with William, Victor's youngest brother, and Justine, who we saw was framed for the murder of William, and now Clerval. So it's almost Victor is arrested at first and imprisoned as he's blamed for the death of this person, of Henry, and he finds himself, stuck in a prison cell and suffering. And he seems like a madman as well, because he's sort of, his mental health diminishes. He gets sick and, feverish while he's stuck in this cell. And there is one character, Mr. Kerwin, who shows him kindness and listens to him and supports him and reaches out to his father and doesn't believe that Victor did it. So he shows Victor some sympathy. So there is still kindness in the human society that's represented in Mr. Kerwin. So the monster has taken its anger and revenge of Victor out on Henry, so redirecting or acting out its anger and revenge on an innocent person. Victor is the one who's accused of the murder, as he's a stranger in that town, and he was in the boat, and the witnesses saw that the murderer escaped in a boat, so he's the logical, at least from a superficial appearance, he's the logical choice to be the murderer, because they know that the murderer was in a boat and Victor was in a boat. So after hearing of Clerval's murder, Victor falls ill, and again his illness corresponds to a sense of guilt. So whenever he has like internal conflict or feelings of guilt, it manifests itself in his poor health and poor mental and physical health. And so he suffers in health. He suffers in health while he's being imprisoned. So he is later, this is after like 2 months or something of being imprisoned, he's later free to go. So he says, I was spared the disgrace of appearing publicly as a criminal, as the case was not brought before the court that decides on life and death. The grand jury rejected the bill on its being proved that I was on the Orkney Islands at the hour the body of my friend was found, and a fortnight after my removal, I was liberated from prison. So his father comes and tries to sort of, help him heal from all this trauma that he's experienced. But he doesn't ever reveal to his father the truth of what happened. So his guilt remains internalized, and he remains, tormented by his conscience. He says, I remember as I quitted the prison, I heard one of the men say, he may be innocent of the murder, but he has certainly a bad conscience. These words struck me. A bad conscience. Yes, surely I had one. William, Justine, and Clerval had died through my infernal machinations. And whose death, cried I, is to finish the tragedy. Ah, my father, do not remain in this wretched country. Take me where I may forget myself, my existence, and all the world. So, yes, he's anticipating more deaths to happen. He's saying, how is this tragedy going to finish? And he, again, talks as if, he is the one who's responsible, but he doesn't fully explain to others that he's created this monster. He doesn't want to tell anybody else because he feels like they would view him as insane or suppose that he was, had lost his mind. He returns to Geneva with his father, and he anticipates confronting the monster on his wedding night.